Okay, we're live. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are from. Today's episode is where we're going to address a lot of dating issues. But what we're going to start with is the more preliminary questions. So the idea for this episode, Michelle asked some wonderful questions to me, and I thought it would be great to make this public and bring in Sanduni as well, because we've all just been in conversation with each other and just really interested in the idea. So to start off, Michelle's question, which by the way is OG Rose. They're kind of like the philosophical duo. If you guys have a chance to follow their YouTube channel, OG Rose. They're great. They have great stuff. Actually, that's how Sanduni found them, through me, and we've all just kind of came across each other, and it's been really great. So all right, let's get started. The questions that Michelle posed is, what is dating? So I think we can just start with that, because that's a big enough topic. I'm gonna let you guys take it. See what happens.
Sanduni, would you like to start, Buff?
Sure, no pressure there. What is dating? I'm the wrong person to ask, frankly speaking. Dating could be many things. Dating is referred to in many different ways these days. It could be referred to as seeing each other. It was referred to as courting. It can be seen as a dalliance. It can be seen as casual intermingling. It can be a lot of things. But I think if I really had to describe what dating is, it would be sort of coming together and trying to find a common desire to be together. That's where it all begins, where there is some sort of value that you seek from the other person, and you believe this person will add value to your life and will complement your life in some way, whether it's socially, financially, mentally, in some element. You expect them to add what you're lacking in your life. That is one of the many common ways of, I suppose, describing what dating is. What do you think, Javier?
I think it's a good response. I mean, it's one of those things that so in philosophy, we've often associated desire with lack, right? This sort of we're missing something. Now, what's interesting is that if we're missing something, we're also implying that something was there previously, which gets really interesting, because then it's like, how did we come into existence and already claim that we're missing something? And so when we talk about dating, is that two individuals kind of acknowledge that we're missing something. But then it gets weird, because what happens is, what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to fill my lack and you're trying to fill your lack. But we all know that it's just like lack versus lack. We still get lack at the end of the day. And I feel like, because, and this is what we could say is happening, right? We're trying to overlap our lacks. And what we end up realizing is that none of us can fill each other's lack. You're always going to be desiring something else. You see this in just the general dialogue of relationships, right? This idea of, I've caught my husband cheating or something, right? Or you've caught an interest, maybe a man that you're pursuing. You find that he's just interested in other things, right? It might not even have to be other women. It could just be like he's just interested in his job, in his career, in his just any aspect. And you start realizing that you can't fulfill that desire of his. At best, you might participate in a little bit of his desire. And so I think this is what ends up being painful, is that we realize that we cannot satisfy each other fully, because at the end of the day, as human beings, we're just always desiring other things, and that this lack can never really be fulfilled by a single person. So I think dating. I want to make this almost metaphysical, right? Dating, I would say, in the metaphysical context, is trying to match my lack with another lack, right? My lack with another lack. And so that's what creates the attraction. And I thought Michelle's example of a long time ago, actually, she told me this example of a vacuum, and how a vacuum will literally use the space inside of it to create a suction, right? And I found that very intriguing, because I feel like that's exactly how seduction and attraction works, right? You have a lack, and then you come across another person, and you just you just like you really want to like be engulfed in them, or they want to engulf you, right? It's either or. Sorry, what do you guys think?
100%. Well, if you don't mind if I jump in here. So to your point, Sandy, that there are many ways to define dating. I always thought it was interesting, because my parents would think like their concept of dating was to literally just kind of more true to the word. Okay, what is the word? Dating. Okay, so we're like looking at a calendar. We have dates on a calendar. Okay, so for them, the concept was very much, you go on a date. You may go on dates with many different people, because it's a date. Usually wouldn't be physical. Usually would just be something where you go and have lunch, go see a movie. And for them, it was like this very strange idea that dating suddenly became like serial dates, like a succession of continuation, where it was something that was really more of a relationship. Now obviously dates could and often would lead to a relationship, but the concept of just dating itself was, for them, in their mind, they're like, that I don't understand. You're going on a date. Like, what? It's not a big, you're going to have lunch, and then it's like, oh, well, that means the person's interested, or they want to pursue something that's sustained. Oh, okay. Then, so it's more like courting, or it's more like they want a relationship with you. It's like, yes. So in the modern concept of dating, I think, has become much more loaded of a term. Like, I think it really just used to be about a date on the calendar where you're going to go get lunch with Bob. Okay. Now it's dating is like this whole loaded ethics. There's just so much that is the term now carries. It carries so much more with it now, I think. And I think that's very interesting. I have some ideas about why that might be related to the technology question. So I'm not going to jump into that quite yet, but we'll put a little pin in that right now. Moving on to the idea of the lacks, right? What is interesting about this then is that it seems like dating, first of all, to even acknowledge that it has to do with our lack is important. Because if we don't acknowledge that, if we don't recognize that about dating, we will have no idea what we're doing. I mean, we'll never know exactly what we're doing anyways, but we'll really not know what we're doing. We'll really not have a good understanding of why we're doing it. What is the purpose of it? What are we trying to achieve? Because a lot of times dating, because it does have that still the connotation of the going out to lunch, going and doing something, there's something very related to like entertainment about dating, right? Like there's the idea of like a Friday night date, or you're going to get in your little black dress for a date, or something fun. And that makes sense, because if it has to do with going and doing something together, then that's, you'd be making a date on the calendar to do that. But I think the risk with that is that dating is only ever seen in the light of fun. It's only ever seen in the light of the fulfillment, right? If I've got this like suctioned the desire, right? And then I it's just going to be, I'm just going to consume it. I'm just going to consume the person and their time and the fun. And then, you know, the only problem with that is like, it's a very quick thing, you know, like it's a very suction in, and then it's that event is over, right? And so I think dating has unfortunately fallen only into the category of entertainment, right? Consuming and entertainment. And there's a place for those elements in dating and in relationship and in building a relationship, but the risk to see it only that way is to forget the mechanisms of dating that actually allow you to be more in touch with the fact that you do have that lack, the fact that, as you said, Javier, that lack will never be met by that other person. Like the fun will come and go. And I just think the risk with the dating is that there's such a dependency that's created there. And that's, I mean, of course, we're all going to have some sort of connections with other people, dating or otherwise, but it's that like the suction that then has this really strong cohesion that's so fixated, that is both thrilling and devastating at the same time. And that's, to me, where dating is. I'm going to pass it off now, but I do want to return. Hopefully we can flesh this out a bit more, because I have this concept of the roller coaster rides, the theme park, and the mountain. So, yeah. Anyone want to speak to that aspect of dating?
I think what you said is very interesting, Michelle, about dating being about getting a date on the calendar, meeting up for lunch or a movie, and having the very specific defined framework. Yeah. But obviously we've evolved, you know, in the modern times, dating's taken many forms. It could be anything. It could be something platonic, something that's not platonic, and we could just call it dating, because really words have lost their value in modern time, as I would say. And while we say that, you know, yes, you commit to a day, you commit to a time, but do you go there with the awareness that you lack something and you're seeking it from the other person? This individual could not know that. You could just be out there trying to get to know another person, trying to make time and to see if you sort of get along or if there is a future. But this question of lack is quite interesting, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we refer to it as a lack because we're aware there is something that we're seeking out there. But there are people who seek subconsciously or don't seek at all because they don't know what they want. And that is one of the biggest problems in modern dating. We don't really know what we want. So what are we seeking? And just because we don't know what we want, we could easily put the other individual on a pedestal. And you might think that's what you're supposed to be seeking, and mold the rest of your time around that date, thinking, oh, what this person's offering is probably what I'm supposed to be seeking. Mm-hmm. So drawing upon the topic of lack and seeking what we don't have from the other and complementing each other, I really think it comes with a sense of self-awareness. You need to know what you're doing, why you're going where you're going, and what is the purpose of you going there, whether it's what you make of that day or what you two make of as according to your relationship. And that's really the tricky bit, because you could be out there having a great conversation and all of a sudden you realize, okay, this person intrigues me. And does he intrigue me because I've already thought that before, or does he intrigue me because I've never heard what he said before? Which one is it? And then you decide, do you want to indulge in this further? Do you want to indulge and explore the unknown? Or do you want to explore the sense of familiarity that you already have, because you already know the point that he made or she made, and then you go from there? So when we talk about what's lacking and what isn't, first of all, we need to know what we're lacking, and we need to identify it as something we lack. Sometimes it's quite an interesting word when you say lack, because it almost sounds very negative. It sounds like it's something you don't have, but it could also be something you're yet to discover. And this person this individual or this experience could be what breaks it through to you. It doesn't really have to be a lifelong complementing that's being done, whether it's financially, socially, mentally. It could just be a breakthrough. And sometimes we do meet people, especially when it comes to intimate affairs and dating, because you really give your 100% or you're very mentally present in that situation, that you pick up things about yourself as well that you haven't noticed before. You think, hang on a minute, I did pay attention there. I never thought about this way. I never looked at someone this way. It has its pros and cons, but I feel like the awareness that we bring into a relationship to captivate or to seek what we don't know from the other individual really opens a lot of doors about what we're seeking and what we're lacking, and identifying them within ourselves. What do you guys think?
So I'll just comment on the how Michelle put the dating and the marking of the date and how everything like that. I'm going to generalize this a little bit further, right? So basically, what I'm going to say is that even if it's a date, like if I'm jotting down a date for a day, or maybe I'm setting a plan for a date, an actual date. Here's the thing about dates in general. Dates are potentials. Even if I talk about the calendar, right? I talk about Thursday, about the plans I'm going to do with Thursday on Thursday. And so I'm always looking forward to Thursday because these are the plans and potentials that I'm thinking about, right? So what I'm already doing is that I'm already setting an intention to inscribe that day. But the thing is, we also do this with people. When I meet someone, when I feel like I'm missing something, I feel like I'm already doing the intent to inscribe. Now, this intent to inscribe on somebody else, to make them my date, to make them that potential, this can happen either consciously or unconsciously. Now, so I feel like when Michelle talked about, she wanted to bring up the roller coasters and everything, this aspect of, I feel like technology actually, what it does is it actually only participates in further elaborates on our fantasies, right? For example, a man shows up with a fancy car, right? The woman might be wowed. She's like, wow, he has lots of money. So it plays into her fantasy of value and a man of value because he has a car. So it sort of elaborates the picture. It makes the picture very colorful and elaborative. And that's just one example. But just to tell you guys a story Slavoj Zizek gave, which I found very interesting, and I thought it would be great to bring this up, just to show how asymmetrical dating really is, and how there's this constant play of images going on. So we're all familiar with the girl that kisses the frog and then it turns into a prince. Okay. So, but actually what Zizek does, he goes a step further. He says, okay, so there's the woman and she kisses the frog and it turns into a prince. But then here's this, the prince then draws the woman closer and she turns into a bottle of beer. Okay. So what is this, all this asymmetricalness? So what happens, what he's trying to portray here is that actually we never see each other as each other. The woman always sees the man as the prince, right? In this story, the woman always sees the man as the prince. And the man always sees the woman as his beer bottle. And so what it's really trying to say is that we have these idealistic images in between us that we can never actually have this real relationship. So even the idea, in my opinion, even if I feel like I think I know what I want, I'm already projecting an image out there. And so I'm always going to be comparing that image with the people that I meet. And I'll be like, oh, she's not the beer bottle. She's not the beer bottle. Oh, no, she's not the beer bottle. Right. And I'm just going to keep doing this over and over again. And what's really crappy about dating websites is that they just continue to feed your fantasy. Right. What do you like? Okay. What's your preferences? You want long distance? You want short distance? You want You want women from the ages 8 to 25. Like, it just continues the fantasy. It just elaborates it, right? It makes it very elaborative. And so I feel like in some sense, we've evolved socially and technology-wise. But in terms of the way we actually relate to each other, it really hasn't changed. In terms of desire, it hasn't changed. There's always been this sort of fantastical image in between us all. And this is very difficult. And I would say that any time that you're surprised is when this image actually breaks away. Because, and what's beautiful about surprises is that it disrupts your fantastical image. You go, oh, wow, I never saw that coming. You know what I mean? I didn't expect this. Why didn't you expect this? It's because you're already setting an image. You've already done this image. You're going like this. Okay, not a beer bottle, not a beer bottle, not a beer bottle. And then all of a sudden you come across some wine, right? You're like, oh, whoa. You didn't expect it. So I feel like I don't want people to get the wrong idea here. Like I'm comparing women to objects, but I mean, well, in some sense, there is people that do this, right? Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, it's the image that really distracts us. And so it's always asymmetrical. And this is where Lacan says, actually, there's no such thing as a sexual relationship. Why? Because of this asymmetry. We're never actually participating in a real relationship because there's always the relationship between my fantasy and your fantasy. So I never see you as you see me. If I would have seen what you see as a prince, right? And then you would have realized that you're like how I see you as a beer bottle, right? Then maybe we could see like what the hell's going on. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, I'm going to jump in just really quick while it's still right here. So what's so interesting, and it does remind me a little bit about what you and Cadell got into in your conversation on modern dating, where it's so ironic. It's so ironic because when you say this idea of when the breakaway happens of the image, and you're like, wait, my fantasization, my fantasy is like not going, like it's not what I thought it was. But isn't that the real place of adventure and fantasy? Like, isn't that the place where it's more than you could think or imagine, or it's not what you could think or imagine, which is beyond your imagination, which then kind of pulls you even up further, or like it extends you further into a place of the unknown and the real fantasy and the real adventure. And it's fascinating to me. And I will bring up my roller coaster imagery here again, because this was an aspect of it. Modern dating is a roller coaster ride. It's so much more like a theme park these days, because you want a thrill ride, but you want the safety belt. Okay, you want to feel secure. Okay, so you want to feel cushy and you want to feel secure, but you want the loops. You want the heights, you want the drops, you want to see really high, you want the screaming, you want it all, you want the laughter. And it's like, but guess what? It's on a track. There is a specific track it will take, and then it will end. And you're like, that was great. Oh, now it's done. And somebody has to go and press those buttons again to make you have a good time. And now we are in a technological age where there's a lot of button pressing, right? To send a message, you send the button, you hit the button. And there's this very interesting, strange, sort of almost robotic aspect of dating relationships. And it's wild that our spaces are no longer like defined anymore, right? Like you can be in your bedroom in your underwear, like texting the plumber or whatever, you could just to say like just something casual, like, hey, make sure to come tomorrow for the appointment, or you're confirming something with this person. And it's just like, you would never be able to talk to somebody like that unless they were in your bedroom with you, and it's just so the whole idea of spaces and technology and how that's changed, that I shouldn't really have tapped into that, because that's a whole nother thing that I hope we do get into later. But to stick back on the fantasization, okay, and the adventure and this image, right? the thing is, we think we want adventure, like you and Cadell talked about so well, but we actually don't. We want like, and don't get me wrong, I love theme parks. I like roller coasters. So I mean, they're fun. I know people love them. It's nothing about that. This is an imagery. This is an analogy. And in this analogy, the thing is that we can get so fixated on how we think it should be, how we think it should go, how we think it should look, right? How it should feel. And at the end of the day, it's not, it was like fabricated for you, you know, and you really didn't do anything. You just sat there and it's being done to you. It's being done to you and it's on this track. And if we were to really get off rail, that's what, but there's always the thought, like, you know, you're in that roller coaster at the very top of that peak and you're like, dear Lord, I could like fall out of this. And then I'm just like, and the fact that there's like kind of that potential there is like makes it exciting, but you're really not, you know, you're not going to, because otherwise they get sued out of the wazoo for having this roller coaster that people fall out of. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, we want the security, we want the seatbelt, we want to actually feel secure in that. And yet we still want the thrills. But we're not doing a whole lot ourselves. And as soon as, and we want it to look a certain way and be our fantasization, and the breakaway would just absolutely possibly kill us emotionally, you know, like, I think, but that's the cool thing, because when you have that death, you get the rebirth too. So there's something really great about that. And that's my mountain analogy, because there's also highs and lows there too. But I'm going to pass it off now, but those are some initial thoughts to the whole Zizek beer bottle frog prince concept. So, which I love. Zizek is hilarious. Just so good.
Sanduni?
Wow. So there was beer bottles, there was frogs, there was a roller coaster. There's a lot to live. I mean, I could have a whole different interpretation of the roller coaster. Like, you've put a lot of imagery in my head right now. And Lacan says that, you know, our desires are never our own, they're others. And I feel like what's wrong with that fantasy is that what inspires that fantasy in you? Is it a fairy tale your mum read to you when you were off to bed when you were 5? Is it a film that you've seen? There's so many external influences. There's cinema, there is the books we read, the communities we grow up in. All of those things shape our fantasies. And when you mentioned the roller coaster, Michelle, all I could think of is how short-lived that ride is. And that is how short relationships tend to be these days. You know, you just last a season if you're lucky, or till the end of the month. And that's one of the many reasons, because your fantasy is so short-lived. And it's sometimes not even your fantasy. It could be what you see on social media. It could be what you see around you. It could be what your friends talk to you about. But is it really what you want? Have you ever really thought, is that the kind of individual I want to be with? Or is it what's in trend these days? Is that what is suitable? I mean, even with things people do in relationships these days, like on social media, you see different challenges, the trips they go on, it's usually the same place from the same circle. If, you know, someone goes to Disneyland for their anniversary, it's pretty obvious, it's pretty guaranteed that the next person will do the same thing from the same circle. It's just natural. You know, humans are constantly influenced by external sources, external factors, whether it's ideas, thoughts, people, friends, whatever we do. And I feel like the fantasy is so short-lived and rapid because of that, because there is no sense of originality there. And when you desire, you're also very demanding in your desires, because you expect the other person to see you through your desire. And when they don't live up to it, you become demanding. And that's when you sort of become obsessive or possessive in relationships. And that's also a very common thing in current relationships, where you see narcissistic attributes, you see possessiveness, obsession. But where do these come from? These come from because you're not getting the approval or the validation or the desires you're seeking or demanding. And I think it's very interesting when you mentioned the roller coaster. I mean, all I was thinking about was how fun the journey is.
Yes.
But the pace is really in your head. It's only as fast as you comprehend it to be. Yes, it is fast for obvious reasons, but it's only as heightened of an experience as you make it. And so are relationships. And I think these days it tends to be very short-lived because, first of all, the fantasy is not completely your own. It could be that you're in that roller coaster because everyone else is in it, all of the other people in the front and the back. And the seat belt that you wear could be society, because you've come of age, because you're young, or because it's about time you date someone, because there's always time that's socially constructed by people when it's right or wrong to be pursuing someone. It could be that. You could interpret the belt that you put on to safeguard yourself as society and the pressures that it brings to you, that it tells you that, you know, you're supposed to be pursuing someone, you're supposed to be involved in such an affair, and it's supposed to be a certain way. And obviously your fantasy gets lost when your desires aren't met, because your desires turn into demands when it's prolonged. And that's why relationships are short-lived, because as soon as you see this person is not going to live up to my expectation, or perhaps I'm not going to get what I seek, you just take the easy way out, because you realize this person can't feed what I'm lacking, or can't give me what I'm lacking. And that's one of the many reasons that I would say that relationships fall short, or you fail to compromise because you feel all is lost if your desires are not met, because you only validate your desires. There are times when you don't even consider the desire of the other, because there's always that element too. When two people come together, one person is quite empathetic and the other person is just selfish and desiring and demanding. And it's human nature. One tends to be more confident, one tends to be more dominant than the other. And hence why the empath gets left alone to survive, and the confident, narcissistic individual sort of walks out with what he or she wants, or just, you know, aborts mission and decides, well, you're not going to be the supply I seek or demand that's going to meet my desires, and hence we move on and we swipe right to the next person.
So there's a lot of things that Dooney said here that...
Are we pausing for dramatic effects?
No.
That's it.
I mean, I'm just trying to digest the information here, you know? But what I like that you brought about...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Can you hear us, Sandy?
Do you mind
I can't hear you guys. Are you speaking?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Sandy?
I was done with my point.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Sandy?
Okay. I think she can.
Okay.
I'm glad. I was like, did I say something wrong?
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
To go with the...
I can. I was just worried that the pause was too long and I thought I said something wrong.
Oh, no. It was excellent. We're digesting.
Yes.
This is like the pause meditation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I thought
Yeah.
I thought what was interesting about the narcissistic attempt here, the narcissistic attempt. This makes me think about something I've been thinking about a lot, right? The phenomena of the fuckboy, right? Everybody talks about this, but I was thinking about, because there's a lot of cliches in the dating world, right? This aspect of, like, you hear this all the time, like, nice guys finish last, and then the fuckboy sort of exploits the dating sphere, you know. But what I found really interesting about the whole dynamic of this is that what I was thinking about, what makes that kind of male that exploits the dating sphere so attractive. And I thought what makes it attractive is actually because it's not that he's perfect. It's actually because he's very incomplete. He's such a fallible and incomplete subject that he's attractive. And that's what feeds the attraction. Now, and then I thought about, well, what about these so-called, men that claim themselves to be good men, right? Good men that supposedly finish last, right? And I was thinking about this. And what I thought about was, it might be the fact that the woman looks at the guy that's good, is that what's scary for her is that she doesn't see anything that's desiring in the good man. Why? Because he just doesn't seem like he's lacking anything. He doesn't seem like, it's just basically, in her eyes, it might be too good to be true. It's just not attractive, right? At the beginning, it's just not attractive because she's like, oh, he's such a good guy, so nice, he's so great. But then there's just nothing that's incomplete about him. There's nothing that's error, right? There's no room for error, it seems. But the other guy, the one that exploits, the one that's more incomplete, he's filled with error, right? And so this is you could say this is the sort of toxic relationship that goes on, right? Where the woman, I would argue that most women consciously know that they shouldn't go for the male that exploits, right? But they also can't help it. They also can't help it, right? But there's also a variety of ways to do this dialect, right? Because also I was thinking from the perspective of the fuckboy, right? So what he's attracted to is not the women. What he's attracted to is his own lack. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the reason why it seems he's so ruthless and he's so cold is because he's attracted to his own lack, right? That means that he will do whatever he can to satisfy that lack. Now, I thought about the other way around, the male that is deemed the good guy and doesn't get the female, right? Let's just call this the guy that gets friend zoned, right? So the guy that gets friend zoned, why is he still attracted to the woman that doesn't want him? The woman that he's in complete admiration of, she is basically perfect. She's on a pedestal, right? But he's so attracted to her. Why is he so attracted to her? Is actually, again, because he's attracted, is because she reminds him how incomplete he is, how he can't fill that void, and he's never gonna fill that void. But that's the thing. That's what keeps attracting him, is that this female that rejects him, he keeps obsessing over because she reminds him in a very unconscious way of his own lack. And because he will never be significant enough to fill that lack, but he's trying to, because in reality, he's really attracted to his own lack. And she is a reminder of that. She is a constant reminder of that lack. So I felt like doing this, interesting inversion where it's like, really, it's very hard for us to get attracted to people in general, because in reality, what ends up occurring is that we're just actually very attracted to our own insignificant lack. We're just very attracted to this space. But what I thought about this, what kind of gets distorted, is actually this space that we want the other to fill is actually, this is where it gets affirmative here, is actually what we're supposed to fill. We're supposed to fill that gap, not the other person. That space is actually for us. And I feel like once we do that, once we attempt to realize that this lack, this space that we keep trying to hold people for is in reality not a space for anybody but ourselves. It is the potential for us to come into being. And until then, it's always going to be this interchange of like, I've been holding this space for you. Why you keep not doing the things I ask you to? You keep disappointing me. Again, it's a space for you, not the space for the other person. So that's what gets really intriguing. So what do you guys think? Michelle.
Oh, okay.
Amen.
Yeah, right. And if we do a applause for that one, but it's so spot on. And you guys both brought up a lot of great things. I hope I can address them here with my little notes I jotted down. So the idea that you're talking about with the lack, with the this like kind of player type, I think that's so fascinating because he actually wants to perpetuate his lack, right? And that it's like he's got these serial engagements with women, and he actually perpetuates it. It makes it even more and more and more. Same with the man in the friend zone, right? It's like this. It's really strange because it's like this constantly like it's almost like an internal regression or like an exponentiation suddenly of the lack that they're after, right? And this is why, like we said at the beginning, it's so important to understand. And like you've said before, Javier, like people don't like it when you say like, oh, well, you don't really know what you want, right? And certainly even to say that, it's like, well, I couldn't really know exactly what the other person wants. What we can know is that we're often very confused about what we want. We're very uncertain about what we want, all while we're being very certain, you know? And so the thing is to be aware of the lack that plays such a gigantic role. You know, you said it's the insignificant lack, and it's true in the grand scheme of things if we compare it to like the universe and all time and everything. But it's like it's so significant though. To us, it feels so significant, and it's felt day in and day out on our waking and our sleeping, and so it's so present. And if we don't understand that's what is just completely the fuel for our actions, we will be very confused and further confused, further hurt in dating and relationship engagements. So I thought that was very, very interesting, Javier, the polar ends, these two archetypes of the men. And I think you're absolutely right that it's actually really, they're very much the same. It's very much about this gigantic lack and an obsession with it that causes them to do the things that they do, right? There's almost a self-sabotage in that, because in a way that's comforting, right? There's almost like a safety in that, right? Because you know you can do that, so you're going to keep doing that, right? Because it just kind of affirms that lack for you. And this is the affirmation. So it's funny because when you then get into, Javier, about like, wait a second, it's not the other person. It's actually all about what you're dealing with yourself. This relates a lot to what me and Sanduni talked about in our affirmation talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there, and I hope we get into that a lot there and bring up some interesting questions and considerations. But it's okay. This is why I really do think the mountain versus roller coaster analogy could be helpful to speak to this as well, because if you're on your journey on a mountain, okay, you are the one going up, slipping down, trying again, not giving up and climbing your mountain, okay? You don't need the architect to design the roller coaster. You don't need the person managing the buttons. You don't need the person who invited you and paid for your ticket for the roller coaster. You actually don't, it's there. You don't have to rely on all of those externals and the other to do the climbing. And it's actually already there for you, but you have to see it and you have to embark on it. And the great thing about it is when you do that, you start to do some of that grappling. And the other thing too, with the mountain, there's a lot of quiet. I mean, there's going to be the sounds of nature around you, perhaps, but the theme park lends itself in the direction of artificial lights, lots of sound, lots of colors, and those are really fun. And can be really fun to indulge in and enjoy. But if that is the only concept of dating we have, we are going to be very, very disappointed. We are going to be very, very confused, because in reality, life is a trajectory. There's a lot of time, and what is more often than not true about life is that it's going to be more like climbing a mountain. It's the journey. right? It's the day in, day out, one step at a time that you are doing. And there's a lot of work in that and sweat in that. But then you have the opportunity for seeing incredible sights that you would never see had you not embarked on that journey. But you're doing it. Now, you might actually stumble upon someone else who's climbing their mountain, and you're like, oh, hey, and then suddenly you're like, oh, like that's kind of neat. Like, oh, are you going this way? Oh, no, I'm going this way. Oh, okay. Or maybe you're both going like, oh yeah, I'm going up there. And there's this kind of really neat thing that you're not reliant on each other to keep doing the journey, but you could possibly do that journey together. Whereas with the roller coaster, you have to have all those externals. You have to have, even if you're like, well, you could just ride the roller coaster solo. Yeah, but somebody had to make the roller coaster. You had to pay for tickets to go to that. There has to be somebody managing buttons to press to make it go. So there's so much more reliance on the other. And when the ride stops, you're like, there's that sense of like, well, now what? And instead of realizing that, oh, no, you're doing it. You're doing the climb. Like just keep going on your mountain and understand the value of the work you're doing with and in yourself. And that's why I always love Rilke, the poet, where he talks about being like fast after yourself. And this is not, that could possibly sound like selfish or self-interested to some people, but you've got to understand even helping other people comes from what you understand about yourself, right? And like, how do you understand and deal with the lack in and of yourself? Because at the end of the day, you're the one who wakes up in your body and you go to sleep in your body. And so I just think I do think the mountain analogy can really help with that, perhaps, because I guess I'm always fascinated in like oscillations and waves, and light and sound is all in waves, right? It's all these ups and downs. So that's why I like the idea, because roller coasters do that, and so do mountains. So that was just something I wanted to bring up there.
I quite like the point that you made, Javier, about the lack presenting himself and owning his lack, whereas the good guy always finishes last. That is true, because often women tend to like projects, not stable men. They tend to like something that they can fix. That's what we want. We want to have a sense of power, empowerment, and we look in all the wrong places. You don't have to be empowered if you tell a man what he is. You have to be empowered in knowing you shouldn't be able to tell him what he's doing. He should know that himself. And it's completely fine if you're not the one pressing the buttons there. But more or less, more than trying to find someone who complements your life, you tend to find a person who makes you forget the misery of your life, or who makes you forget your own shortcomings, because you don't really work on yourself. The mountain analogy, Michelle, would be a great example if you see the mountain as, a journey of self-discovery. It is so much easier if you just saw the hike as something that you get on to find yourself, instead of trying to find grounds with another individual. Because if you are not mindful enough to realize your boundaries, you don't create them for another individual. And no matter how good or bad that individual is, they're likely to walk all over you if you don't know where to draw those boundaries. And especially when you talk about how players usually tend to get their way with women, whereas the good guys don't. Because there's a lot of trauma bonding. It's not love, it's not infatuation, it's not obsession. It's trauma bonding. You bond over the trauma. That's all you bond over, the negativity that you have. You see the lack, and you see this individual lacks it more than I do. Then perhaps I'm not so much in a bad position. They are in a worse position. And somehow you feel good about yourself there. So the needed work is not done. You're just digging a deeper grave for yourself, except that the other individual is 6 feet under and you're just 3 feet under. But you're on your way there, except you don't realize it. And that's why it's called trauma bonding. And that's one of the many reasons why I feel the so-called bad guys or the players or the individuals that take you for granted have their way with you because they play at your weaknesses. A good man a good man, what is a good man? That's a different topic. But if you were to call someone a good man, they would never play at your weaknesses. It would be about acknowledging who you are, acknowledging who you already are, not telling you who to be or putting you through this illusion of what you're not. They would be very happy to embrace who you are or who you present them with. Whereas the person who's lacking would just constantly be playing at your vulnerabilities and challenging you. And there you are on a mission. Do you know what? I'm going to save the day and help this individual. And that's how everything goes downhill. Because you don't let that person work on themselves. You don't work on yourself. You somehow think their burden is yours to carry, and you embark on a journey that's going to be misleading for both of you, because your desire is to become their desire. Your desire is to become what they're lacking. It might not be fitting. You might not be what they need. They need to save themselves, but you don't really acknowledge it because your desire is to become someone's desire, and you lose yourself in the process. And that's why abusive relationships tend to last longer than relationships that have good communication and, where you part ways on good terms. Abusive relationships tend to go on for longer because you prolong the outcome, you prolong the exit, because you keep trauma bonding. The highs and lows, you get addicted to the high of thinking momentarily, I have fixed an impossible creature. You're telling yourself you're capable on someone else's shortcomings instead of fixing your own. What do you think, Javier? I feel like you have a lot to say there.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you brought this up, because this idea of trauma bonding, right? So Freud says something very interesting that I read recently, where Freud actually says that when you are having in therapy and the patient falls in love with the doctor, Freud defines this actually as the patient resisting treatment. Isn't that funny? Because that's what a lot of dating is like. And so when you said trauma bonding, that's exactly what it is. It's two individuals resisting treatment, right? So why is the relationship toxic? Well, the relationship's toxic is because they refuse to treat themselves. Why? Why does the refuse to treat themselves? Well, the refusal to treat themselves is difficult because it requires work. It requires work. So it's not just the roller coaster, it's the construction of the roller coaster. But also, just to kind of go back to the mountain analogy, what I really like is when you said the mountain is really for self-discovery. Yes, that's exactly what I think dating is supposed to be like. Self-discovery, not for you. I think maybe we've got it wrong. Maybe it's not really for me to get to know the other person, but actually what the other person can help me do is self-discover myself in some kind of beneficial way, right? Because like I said, we want to be surprised. And this eruption would allow me to realize something about myself that I never realized. And that's what's really attractive. Because I can encounter a woman and be like, oh, no, she's not for me, right? And then she might say something just completely appalling, right? Or something, and I'm just like, whoa, I really like that. Why do I like that? And I feel like we don't really dwell on those questions enough about why exactly do I like that? But in my opinion, it's what just happened is that something came out and revealed a little bit of you. It's not that the person revealed something about them. It's that they revealed something about you. And that's what's really attractive. And to go back to the male that exploits and then the good guy, right? When Michelle says, well, it's the same thing. Yes, exactly. It's the same thing. But the only thing is people think it's differently, but it's not, right? In the social space, it looks different, but they exploit their desire the same way. except one's a little bit sadistic, right? And then it's a sadomasochistic relationship. Either way, right? With the way we exploit our desires. So, in my opinion, this treatment, this idea of dating, really it should be kind of viewed as a treatment in terms of I need to stop resisting myself. And so every time I encounter a new person, it's not about trying to fall in love. It's really about trying to not resist myself, which is more difficult than anything else in the world. I should not resist the treatment, which the treatment is how we relate to each other. If we don't relate to each other properly, this is exactly what Sanduni is talking about, the trauma bonding, right? We're both refusing to treat. We're bonding over our repression. We're bonding over our repression. We're like, yes. And I feel like this is when Nietzsche is totally right? It's when he asks the question, why do the masses desire their repression? Well, yeah, because it's attractive. It's pure cruelty and it's lovely. We like to complain about it in the social space and talk about it, but really under the guise of everything, it's really not so different. Everybody that complains about the exploitation, they're really not different, right? It goes back to the male that exploits and the male that says that he doesn't exploit. Well, he exploits himself just like the freaking male that exploits himself just to substitute women after women after women. It's the same thing. He's exploiting their desire. I mean, his desire, his own. So, yeah. Any more comments on that?
Yeah. Well, so I think this is very, very interesting, right? Again, with the self-discovery, and so it's funny because you say, like, you talk about like don't resist the treatment, right? But I think that maybe the reason why this confusion happens and we forget how much the self-discovery is such a key part of relationships and, actually having some longevity and, beauty, truth, and goodness in those relationships. We forget because the person seems so irresistible. And I think that because the person is so irresistible that we forget that we're actually resisting something in using that person to fill the thing we feel lacking in, and look, I truly believe that when that people, I think that's the kind of the best hope we have perhaps in attraction and irresistibility could be in, again, like when people are not making each other projects, when people aren't doing people projects, but they're doing their own projects, when they're doing their own investments and work, and that can look philanthropic, that can look a lot of different things. It could look creative, like art. It could look like art, but I mean, everyone's life is a type of art. But the point is that it's like the sublimation, like Cadell mentioned, where you're making your light, you're doing the sublimating of art and creation of your own life, and for me, that's very much akin to the mountain climbing. Okay, and when you do that, that's going to, because you're pursuing beauty, truth, and goodness, that radiates, and that's attractive, like moths to light, right? Like that's attractive. But see, I think we almost treat people like they are the mountaintop. We treat people like they are themselves the beauty, truth, and goodness, instead of the fact that they are vessels for it. They are holders. They are the placeholders, like we talked a bit about, Javier, with like Lacan, where they're the placeholders, and often we kind of like keep it just on the human people project level and kind of like insert each other's like lacks and desires into each other like puzzle pieces, which end up just kind of like suffocating the other person, because now they're just completely plastered with your own desire, your own lack, obsession. But really, like, we are vessels. We are we are we are much more so that which is going to shine or irradiate that light, which comes from the sheen of your sweat from your work and your mountain climbing and you're not giving up. I think that we have to really kind of create a space there for that. because then we don't get confused. The irresistibility to the other person is actually both of your irresistibility to the beauty, truth, and goodness, to the becoming, right? To the self-discovery and the journey of life. And it's kind of cool then, because to use your term, Javier, that you enjoy using, and which is a great term, is the witnessing. If you're doing this, if you're not resisting the treatment, if you're not resisting your own self, actually, there's a lot of self-discovery that happens in dating and in relationships. And then the other person's doing their self-discovery. So it's almost like you're witnessing each other making these epiphanies and having these realizations of self and of who you are and what you are becoming. And it's really cool because you both get to witness that in each other. And I think that is really, so it's not so much just this kind of like, it's not so much just this two people and then it's like, so it's almost like a boom and a fade, like a spark and then it goes out. It has to be plugged into something in a sense more of the vertical climbing, right? There's going to be valleys too, though, but there's also the possibilities of heights. So again, like I think I just wanted to bring up that term of the irresistibility, because we resist, but we think we're not because we're irresistible to the person. But what we realize is that we're forgetting. That confuses us. I think that masks things, and we start to think that we're addressing that we're addressing it because we're not resisting that person who's so irresistible, but we aren't actually first addressing ourselves, right? Like we're still in a way, we're actually doing it even more hardcore, resisting ourselves when we're irresistible after the other person. But I did want to bring up the beauty, truth, and goodness, mountaintop, all of that, because there is still I think it's such a beautiful thing that people do find themselves attracted to a person or to other people. Or they admire them, or just sort of respect them, or think, wow, that's interesting. There's going to be that. So it's not as if there shouldn't be irresistibility, but we have to understand what it is, where it's coming from, and what we're doing with it, and what we're doing with ourselves in that. So those were some of the ideas that came to mind when you talked about the resisting treatment.
I think resisting yourself is quite tricky, because you could be resisting yourself, but you'd not be aware of it. So how would you know you're resisting yourself? How do you come into that conclusion? Another thing that I just realized while you were making your point there, Michelle, was talking about desires. We have a conscious and a subconscious desire and an egoistic desire that comes into play, because there are all different kinds of desires. And are we restricting or resisting ourselves because our egoistic desire is to be understood by the person who's lacking? It could be our mission, that mountaintop climb, that whole self-discovery journey could just mean us trying to make them discover themselves. And that egoistic desire blinds you from realizing that you're resisting yourself. And that's why I feel like when people say, when two individuals come together and they spend too much time together, that they start mirroring each other, they become one. Frankly, that's very toxic to me. I just think it's a very toxic notion, because you could be mirroring the side effects of dealing with someone who's got so many issues and who is just being very stubborn with dealing with it, him or herself. And that could just be you projecting that trauma into your life indirectly. You could be someone who has those issues. There is a possibility, like Javier said, this other individual could also have issues, but there could be an individual who does not have these issues, but is restricting and resisting putting themselves out there and putting their foot down and standing up for themselves and saying, no, this is not what I desire, this is what you desire, and I'm here to stroke your ego. I'm here to validate the shortcomings of your life. Hence why there's this terminology, trophy wife or trophy husband. It just looks good. This person makes you look good. They physically, mentally, socially complement your life, and you somehow hide in the shadows of this person. So I think it's quite interesting when you say resisting. There's two types of resisting. There is an indirect resisting where you don't know you're resisting. And then there is a direct resisting because you think, I have the upper hand. I am the dominant person. I'll save the day. And I'm going to give in to this trauma bonding and see it through. Except you're fooling yourself because it's an egoistic desire that you create within yourself saying, if I fix this individual, that means I'll be the one that turned the tables. I'll be the one that was special, that saved the day. I am not going to be another supply that this narcissist had, but I'll be the one who makes a breakthrough. And I think that's one of a few reasons why people resist in these abusive, toxic, bad relationships. It's because you want to be coming out of it saying, you know, I'm the hero. And that could just be an egoistic desire. And that way it's you lacking your own sense of entitlement, even though you knew that this person does not have all of those things. You somehow had it, but you lost it to your ego. Your egoistic desire just took over and shadowed all of that positivity that you had in yourself in the process of giving it to this other individual. And I think that's one of the big reasons that affect you so much while resisting a relationship or breaking through in relationships. What do you think, Javier?
That was good. I thought it was good. The identification with the two types of resistances. That really clarifies some things. Because then, you know, like you said, it gets tricky. And this kind of reminds me again that we can't make each other ends, right? Because this is what happens even with climbing the mountain, right? It isn't over, because once you climb to the mountain, guess what? You're at level surface again, basically. You're at level surface again. There's nothing higher than you. You're not climbing anymore, right? So you're at level surface again to some degree. And this is why I think if people read more poetry, I'm always going to insert poetry here. I think if people read more poetry, they would understand that when we talk about love, one of my favorite things that Gibran says something about even somebody that's giving still needs to give. So it's even egoic in that sense, right? And the person that's needy is the same type of person. They just need the need, right? They need to receive. So it's the same kind of thing. And we always think they're different, you know, and you hear this a lot, right? Someone will complain about, oh, my partner's so abusive because I sacrifice myself for them. They don't ever treat me the way that, I treat them, you know, but at the same time, guess what? They think that they're being selfless, but it's still selfish because it's some kind of kick. They're getting a kick out of the fact that they keep sacrificing. They love sacrificing. They put themselves on the cross, literally, and think that this is how they're going to get the attention from the other person. But in reality, this is how they like to have the attention, is actually to be denied their own a giving. It's a very sadomasochistic way of living, actually. And a lot of people talk about this all the time, right? You know, the person I just gave and the other person didn't give, so I had to leave. Again, it's a still very egoic way of looking at it, because what it is that you've used the person as an end. And you know how I look at it is, if you use somebody as an end, it will end. It will end. It will end. If I look at the other person as a project, I'm implying an end. So that means the relationship's going to end. If I'm getting upset that they're not accepting my sacrifice ends at an end, right? Once you sacrifice, it's done. If you martyrdom, it's done, right? It's an end. So why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we going for ends, right? And so there's something to say about, we need to kind of look at the way we desire, the way we process desire, because the way we process desire is We've mimicked it for years, for centuries, right? This is why, in my opinion, dating, even though in the social space, it has evolved, right? I mean, there's courtships, there's, all these types of evolutions of it, but the way we desire, it hasn't evolved. It stayed the same. People are still having the same problems. People still argue. I feel like I hear the same arguments from just generations, really. But there's something to be said about the way we desire, and I think that is something that needs to be more of a topic, because and that's why I kind of laugh about dating coaches. Dating coaches and all these things. It's just really all they're doing is just helping you get your fantasy. That's it, right? Get you a step into your fantasy, right? You're like, well, I have problems talking to women. They're like, okay, well, I can help you talk to women, no problem, right? So they're just helping you lead further into your fantasy, and you don't question about why you desire what you desire. And that's why I always go back to Rilke, because Rilke says at the end of the day, it sounds negative, but I feel like it's very true. He says, at the end of the day, we're all alone. And I think the way to interpret this is we're all alone with our images. We're all alone with our desires. And this is very isolating, but it's also empowering, because it's about self-discovery. That's why we're alone. And this interaction with people, the way we relate to each other, I think the way we're supposed to relate to each other is we're supposed to help each other realize in some kind of fashion about that we are alone. And this is something that me and Cadell talked about, right? Where it's not supposed to be some kind of pseudo unity, which you talked about, Sanduni, right? Like, I hate that too. I hate when people talk about some kind of like they're enmeshed in each other and so on, because I'm just like, I'm thinking about, this is such a false unity. It's probably semi-toxic, but what I think people should aim for is alone with the alone, right? Solitude with solitude. And Rilke talks about this too, right? The aim of love is that we should protect each other's solitude, protect each other's loneliness. And why? Because this loneliness is what feeds our self-discovery. What helps us continue climbing on the mountain, right? So what I would like is to climb the mountain, and like Michelle says, like, oh, you're climbing the mountain too? Cool, right? You go up to the top, you see each other, and then you climb up again. And then hopefully you're going to see each other again. You're going to look to your side and be like, oh, you're there too. Awesome. And then you keep climbing. What do you guys think?
I have a quick point to add before you take on, Michelle. Like you said about the mountain analogy and climbing together, even when you are walking side by side, one of you is going to be out of breath. One of you is going to be faster than the other. And that alone, that sort of solitude that you have within yourself, is that fine line of space that you need to breathe while walking together. And that's needed. Another thing that people fail to understand in relationships is that I choose to be with you because I have a desire there. There is a want within me to be there. I'm not there because you want me to be there. I am there because I want to be there. And I believe that fine line often does not get addressed or acknowledged because you think it's a selfless act of being with an individual. You forget that this person is there for their own reasons before you. Oh, it's nice that you're accepting and you're receptive, but I'm here for my personal reasons first. And the fact that you feel the same way is the cherry on top. That's all I wanted to add to that. Michelle? You're muted.
Sorry, friends. Sorry, I forgot I'd clicked that. I tend to be like very like, yes. So I didn't want to. Anyways, I'm unmuted now. So that was great, Sanduni. Absolutely excellent. And Javier as well. You guys bring up excellent points. I wanted to say really quick that I really want to address, and Javier and I have talked about this a little bit before in some exchange recordings on this idea of loneliness. Okay. And this is the big thing. We're not exactly just talking about having people around you or not. Because the thing is, you can feel extremely lonely, even when you're in a crowd or even when you're with a couple of people. So this really does get into a lot of what it means to be alone, how sublimating the loneliness into solitude, Javier, like you and Cadell mentioned, and then you've got some great videos on that as well. This is really almost more a state of mind, really. Now you often are kind of pushed to feel that more so when when nobody else is around, right? But it's something you would need to address regardless. Like you're going, because the thing is, if you don't, then it's still going to creep up. When you can feel this feeling when you're with a lot of people or not with a lot of people, right? But it always stems with how you are with yourself, unto yourself. That's the kind of space of the solitude where you're taking the loneliness and the feelings that it presents and saying, what do I make of this? What do I do with this in and of myself, and grapple there in that space. Because again, you are in your body. You are the one who wakes up with yourself and goes to bed with yourself. You are the one on the mountain who is putting one foot in front of the other. Nobody can put one foot in front of the other for you. Now, there are times in our lives where we need to be carried, and that occurs sometimes. But the majority of our life, it's going to be the one foot in front of the other. And I think that's it's just important to bring that up, because it's not simply just saying like just be alone in your room all the time. Though obviously being alone in your room will be probably the space where you feel it most acutely, right? The loneliness, the sense of, oh my gosh, I'm alone with my own thoughts. What do I do? What do I do with my hands? No, I'm just kidding. What are you going to do with your time? What are you going to make? What are you going to do with the things that come up? And so it's most acutely present there. And so you will have to kind of do the grappling to find out, to make that something that can sometimes feel unpleasant, and understand how that can actually be transferred into something that can feel at least worthwhile. Maybe it won't always feel pleasant, but there's something, you acknowledge it being pleasant in that it's worthwhile, right? To understand, to be able to be alone with yourself and be okay in that space, so that when you are with others, when you are in connection with others, there's a much better, I don't necessarily want to use this term, but there's a way in which it could apply. There's a healthier relationship, a healthier relation you have with other people. And so, yeah, it's fascinating too, because a lot of our dating, what we move into with dating stems from a place of our infancy and our childhood and our familial relationships. And I think that it's fascinating, because it sort of shows how we always are kind of in connection with others, right? The only reason we exist and can have solitude is because of two people who came together and conceived us, and it's fascinating to me. So we have to kind of acknowledge, and it's almost like an honoring of the fact that our solitude is only ever because of connectivity. In a sense, there's always this kind of dance between the connection and the it's sort of like the connection when you're going to be with other people and around others, and then the place to times when you're not around others and you're alone and you are yourself. But it's true that at the end of the day, it's like you are the only one who will pass on. You're in, like your death is such a final and telling moment where it's only you, right? And in the mountain journey, it's only you in your body. It's only you putting your one foot in front of the other. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to that, because it's again very ironic that actually being able to do the solitude work where you're by yourself, that you seem to actually be able to have better relationships when you do interact with other people, when you are now suddenly engaging with other people. Just completely fascinating. And so I want to say that. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up with false unity. Oh, right. Okay. So the false unity, right, where you guys are like, that's, and it's so true. It's so true that often we feel like we have this unity and cohesion that we just sort of feel comfortable in saying that and claiming that. I do think, though, it's very human that we are going to mirror. Like, we are going to be influenced by one another. It's inevitable. But I think we'll be able to better incorporate things and not simply just be having plastered things, all these layers, all these, like, if we understand and do the solitude work, right, the self-discovery, the mountain climbing journey, which you are on, which only you are taking, and which sometimes you may find a merry crew with you, and sometimes you will be yourself alone on that hill. Now, there are times when you find that you have the other that will be there with you through that all, and a lot of times in childhood we find the group, or even small group or big group, that's going to be with us on that. But at the end of the day, there's only you and your body. So it's very much a very interesting dance between the alone and the company, if you will. But the mirroring, it does happen. But I think the realization of your own self within the mirroring that's happening is really important, because otherwise you will just allow yourself to be completely taken over by another and not really present your own self in that. And instead of it being this competing battle, which I think it is so much in relationships, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little long-winded, but it's like competing, are you being enough of yourself? Are they being enough of their self? And it's a lot of like a power struggle in dating, marriage, etc. I think what's so important is to, like, why not just allow each other to be each other's self? Why not, like, learn from each other's selves and then sort of say, oh, I want to incorporate that. Wow. But see, the thing is, if you're just mirroring each other, yikes. That's why I think it has to be the orientation towards the truth, beauty, goodness, the mirroring of actually that which is the becoming, this greater pursuit and journey and vision, if you will. I think it's got to be that, in a way, because otherwise you get very confused when those two mirrors are looking at each other. It's that, like, eternal regression. If you've ever seen two mirrors like looking at each other, it's very the eternal regression of what's in those places. So it does seem very interesting, and I think that it's, oddly enough, we can actually, like, it's like, if you, such a visual person here, sorry, but two mirrors like this pointing up at the mountaintop, you can actually, like, look at both and see, like, this really cool image. Again, when you go like this, you're going to see these eternal framings, eternal framings, right? Which I think a lot happens of that, how we frame things, how we frame each other, that happens in this very kind of caustic, toxic type of dynamic of relationship. So, yeah.
Michelle, so I'm reading some of the comments, and your sister said something that I want to address. Your twin sister said, she said, what was her question? She said, what if you call things out, finding out?
I think mirroring works quite well. Oh, go on.
Are you good? So your sister, right? She said, what if we call out those fantasies, right? And I was thinking about your sister's question about what if we call out those fantasies on the partner, and Sanduni talks about this too, right? She was like, that's just your ego. I'm not here for your ego. I'm not here to stroke your ego.
Right.
But I found this, hard to discern a little bit, right? Because remember the Zizek story, right? With the prince and the beer bottle. If we're always seeing each other in these asymmetrical ways, the fantasy does get a little bit hard to point out. It gets really difficult, in my opinion, because it could be this, right? Am I calling out this person because they don't fit my image of them?
Sure.
Or this is really something revealing about them.
Yeah.
And so this gets really tricky. But what I like is this aspect of being as you are, which is interesting. And it's something my mother always told me too, actually. This being as I am, but of course, the question is, I don't really know as I am, right? And this is where I want to tie in the mimetic kind of desire that we have, right? That you brought up, right? Where it is a double-edged sword, right? Because if we're always copying each other the way we desire, then we're always in this perpetual toxicity. But this the way we copy our desires is also the way out. Because if one person can get out into solitude, then the other can copy. It has the potential to copy now.
Yeah.
And that exists within our history, right? You have great poets that have expressed this. And just to throw in the sun metaphor, just for you, Michelle.
Yes.
What ends up happening with our desire is, how about this, right? As subjects, we are the sun. But here's the thing. We like to shine light on everything else but ourselves. And we think what focuses our attention is the sunlight, right? The sunlight always guides our attention. It throws it on a flower, throws it on a tree. It feeds our constant fantasies. The one thing that we don't see is where the sunlight is coming from. And that's why it's so empty, because we're always grasping at rays, right? Yeah. And this grasping at rays is what's really attractive, but it's a false attraction because it is emanating from us. And what it's calling for, and this is where I agree with Lacan, is that you have yet to become a subject. We're assuming that we're already subjects. But here's the thing, right? Like I said previously before, if we were truly already subjects, why am I trying to put somebody in my place of my desire? Why am I trying to fill this empty spot that's for me in reality with somebody else? Why am I making that mistake? And then it goes back to this perpetual copying that we've done with our desire. It's very hard to see past that, really, because the whole internet copies the way everybody else's desires, right? I mean, ever since I was a child, right? Lunchables. That's the one thing I'll never forget about my childhood, Lunchables. My mom didn't want me to get Lunchables because it was too expensive, but I saw a bunch of children with them. I'm like, Mom, why don't you let me have Lunchables, for crying out loud, right? And so I just, to some extent, I never got over it because I'm just like, why? Everybody has them. I want it too. And this is the tricky part. Once we imagine, once we see somebody being satisfied, we imagine that we can get satisfied too. But that's the thing. We're all under the same illusion of this satisfaction. And Instagram, Twitter, they all perpetuate this idea of you will be satisfied if you do this. They construct some kind of ad, right, with some imagined satisfaction. And you're like, wow, yeah, I think that would satisfy me. And then we all encounter what I love to hear is buyer's remorse, right? You start dating somebody and you're like, you know what, just turn this thing in. Just somebody buy this thing back because it's not what I wanted. So yeah, I think the dating solitude, and I thought that was a really good point, is that what I hear a lot of people mistake is they think solitude is some kind of pure isolation, some kind of physical isolation. This is not what it means.
No.
Solitude is learning how to assert yourself as a subject, because you are not yet a subject. And once you assert yourself as a subject, then you are truly the alone with the alone. You are actually a subject. Until then, we're all just kind of holding empty spaces for each other that are meant for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to really quickly say, Lizzie, if you're still watching Mary-Lise, that's my identical twin sister who I adore. And it gets very interesting to talk about solitude and identical twinship. So maybe we'll have to have a discussion sometime on that. But I think you're right with what you're saying. Have we lost Sanduni? I don't know. Maybe we have. But I'll just say this, that with Mary-Lise's question, with calling somebody out or seeing something in them that's not, maybe it is actually a truly negative, bad thing, bad behavior or whatever. It's tricky. And I think I would like to dedicate like an entire time of talking, I'm just going to broke you into this now, Javier, of like talking about what that actually looks like, what that means. Are you okay, Sandy? No, yeah, I'm glad you're back. Glad you're back. Literally, I was just saying that I appreciated Marilyse's question on what if, how do you call, if somebody's doing something that's truly, I don't know, toxic to themselves or to the other person, like how do you call them out? And what does that mean on a philosophical perspective from this whole mirroring and desire lack concept? And honestly, I feel like there's just, I would really love to have like a whole talk on that sometime, because I think it's really tricky, but really important. And I think it's a great question. It's a great question.
I have something to add to that. When you talk about mirroring, I feel like you're such a positive person, Michelle, that mirroring sounded so positive and so understanding. It was so merry. But what happens when two alphas mirror each other? When you put your foot down, you're stubborn and confident, and the other individual is stubborn and confident, then how do you mirror yourself? You'd be fighting for the mic. Then how do you mirror yourself? That's also something we should talk about, because what we really didn't use in this conversation is the word compromise. And that is something people lack, the ability to compromise. And the person who's selfless in this equation of a relationship tends to over-compromise. And it's about finding that middle ground with your inner solitude and self-awareness, where you realize to draw your own boundaries and compromise to a healthy extent. And you decide, well, this is how far I can go. And if you can meet me halfway, then perhaps this will work. But what if you don't mirror your way halfway? What if you don't get there? What if you're just too happy with your picture and the other individual's too happy with their picture? And then the mirroring just doesn't work. You don't complement, you don't correlate. And there's an issue there as well, because it depends on the individual. It depends on what kind of a person you are. If you are open to change, if you are empathetic, then you're likely to meet halfway. But when you're stubborn and fixated in your own ideology or your thinking or your views, how do you find a middle ground there? How do you compromise with the compromise you have to make? Because you think you're supposed to be settling into a leveling ground. Are you settling for less or more? That's up to you. That is something you'll decide. And that's a whole different area that we should discuss when it comes to who is more and who is less in a relationship, and how does that sort of play the dynamics of who takes, who always looks at the bigger picture and who tends to be the bigger person in a relationship. Because in a lot of these narcissistic, toxic, abusive relationships, you have one individual who means well, but is also fixated on being the bigger person. Javier, you talked about this. And how far will you go to be the bigger person? And how far will the other person go violating or abusing this person's ability to be the bigger person and rise above the occasion? So I think those are a few questions that I would sort of like to talk about. When you mirror each other, how do you mirror each other when you're two alphas on the same ground? What do you do then? And when it comes to meeting halfway and compromising, what do you compromise on, or how far would you be willing to compromise, and what influences your decision to compromise? There are certain things that we consider. What are those going to be?
Great point. What is compromise?
It is whatever you want it to
be. Great question, Sanduni. Great point.
I think there's like the ironic paradox that gets cut into the compromise, right? Where it's like socially, we assert ourselves as like some kind of independent being. And so we're like stepping over each other, right? But what's interesting about this is that we're still exploiting our desires. Why? Because I desire my independency and you're stepping over me. So I'm still doing this abusive thing where not only am I stepping on the person, but I'm exploiting my desire because I call myself independent. I call myself dependent or independent. I've seen the toxicity of this on both fronts. Again, it's the same thing, right? They're exploiting their desire, right? I'm really dependent. Please, please, please. Like, again, exploiting their desire. And then the same thing with the independency. No, I don't need nobody. Blah, 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 blah. You're just impeding on my whole space. And again, exploiting your desire to be independent, exploiting your desire to be dependent. And what I think here is that in some sense, they have still not accepted this kind of solitude, this loneliness, because they're exploiting their desire. And I think that's maybe one of the key things, and maybe that might be the sort of unconscious function of compensation, of compromise, possibly, where it's like, ideally, it would seem like you're making a compromise with the individual, right? The other. But actually what you're doing is you're making a compromise with yourself. And you know what this says, right? This says that, okay, I'm going to stop exploiting my desire in this scenario, right? I'm going to stop exploiting my desire to be independent or to be dependent or, you know, to be greedy or whatever the case, right? It always seems like in relationships, it's always like, okay, yeah, we compromise. But actually what you did was you compromised with your own desire. You chose in a very mature fashion to stop exploiting your desire. But in the social sphere, it's always like you're exploiting the other person, which is true in the social sphere. You are exploiting the other person, but in reality, you're always exploiting your desire. And that's the greatest harm, is when you're exploiting your desire. But the compromise function, I believe, is actually when you do this thing with the other individual and say, hey, look, we're going to both stop exploiting our desires, okay? Because it's very toxic. And, you know, we need some growth in this. So I think that's the beauty of the compromise, where you kind of realize that it's like, okay, I'm going to stop exploiting my desire to be independent, my desire to be dependent, whatever that case may be. We need to stop doing this, and we can help each other stop doing this, right? We can help keep each other on top of the other. Remember, protect each other's solitude. And I think this is the beautiful function of the partnership. It's like, I will help you stop exploiting your desire. I think this is, but I'm not looking at you like a project. I want to make that very clear, right? When the partner says, I will help you stop exploiting your desire, this is like an aid. I will aid you as a continual process to protect you from exploiting your desire. And the same person will do the same thing, right? I will help you to stop exploiting your desire. Why? Because it's the alone with the alone, right? I hand you a rope, you hand me a rope. There's a wonderful poem by Gibran where he says, we fill each other's cup, but we do not drink from the same cup, which I love.
That's great.
All right. So, I mean, anybody wants to take? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'll have to probably pop out in a minute here. But I want to say, I think that's a great point, the compromising with yourself. I think that's very interesting and very important, and a great new way to look at that. I've never looked at it that way. And I think that's really interesting. I think there's a part of me that wants to ask a billion questions about that. Maybe we can all talk about it another time. I feel like there's probably, we haven't really even touched the surface on technology and dating, etc. So I don't know how you guys feel, but maybe we can do this again sometime soon and you know, proceed with further questions.
Yeah, I think, because I know you probably have to go, right, Michelle? So
yeah, unfortunately, but you know, you can continue on. I have to go by 1 o'clock.
So I will just, I already finished. Like, I think my statement is, I think that's where I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Sanduni, if you want to finish with what you want to say, or if you have anything else you want to address, and then we can just call it.
Just one last point about compromise, because I brought it up. I mean, I'll leave this with you to think about for our next conversation. Mm-hmm. What about compromising to agree to not expect you to make the compromises I would not make for you? So what are those compromises? How would you have that conversation? Two individuals would sit down and say, my compromise, I think we should both compromise to the point where you and I don't expect each other to make the compromises we would not make for each other. And I think that's something to think about. And I'd like to leave you two with that, and we can reconvene and pick up with this another time.
Yeah. That's a great point, Sanduni. A great way to look at it again in those words. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, all right, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. We really basically got stuck on what is dating, but I think we really got into it. I mean, we did address friendships to a degree, a little bit, not super directly, but a little bit. We did talk about technology a little bit. And I feel like we also addressed long-term relationships and kind of like what that would look like with the alone, solitude and everything. So I feel like we did address the questions, but clearly a lot of the questions could go way more in depth. And I think they deserve a lot of attention, like Michelle said, and Sanduni provoked as well. So I hope that leaves everybody with a lot of thoughts, a lot of reflections. Again, this is like the whole purpose of me doing this because I love this. All right, I hope you guys take care.
Bye, Javier. Bye, Sanduni.